Okay, the next presenter is going to visit with us in regard to what's new in drip irrigation techniques. Stephen Evett is a senior research soil scientist and lead scientist with the USDA Ag Research Service Conservation and Production Research Lab out in Bushland. He uses field measurements, electronic sensing and automation systems, and energy and water balance models to study irrigated crop water use, irrigation application methods, agronomy, and automation as they affect crop water productivity. He has done research across the country and, in fact, across the world. He is a graduate of the University of Idaho and the University of Arizona. Help me welcome our next speaker, Dr. Stephen R. Evett. And you were smart enough to bring your water.
Yeah. I frog up every once in a while, so I'm ready. Is this Ogallala water? Well, probably. Howdy, folks. Said the boy from Idaho. Been here for 26 years. I can almost understand where I'm at. That last talk was a great introduction to this talk, because I'm going to talk about drip irrigation. And when we talk about drip irrigation, we very much end up talking about evaporative loss and how much water we lose from our irrigation systems. And the reason we are really concerned about that in this part of the world is, one, the limited water supply. Even though we have the Ogallala to back us up, long-term average rainfall at Bushland, which is just 12 miles east or west of here, is about 18 inches, and that comes in the winter and the summer as well. It's not enough to grow a crop in most years, and in 2011 it was 5 inches. Last year it was 31 inches. It's very variable from year to year, but look at that right-hand graph. The real kicker for this region is that the evaporative demand exceeds 70 inches in this part of Texas. And that high evaporative demand area reaches up into western Kansas and greater than 60 inches of evaporative demand per year. The reason for that lobe of high evaporative demand moving up through West Texas and into western Kansas is these southwestern winds that the weathermen talk about that come across the southern Rockies. They're originating in the Chihuahuan and Sonoran deserts. They're very dry to begin with, and they drop what moisture they do have in the southern Rockies, and then they swoop down over the plains, and they dry out more as they come down, and they heat up. As they descend, the pressure increases and they get hotter. So we have huge evaporative demand in this region. We have got to figure out how to apply water to crops without losing so much of it to evaporation. Now, we started studying different irrigation application methods, and 4 of them are shown on this slide. Back in the late 1990s out at Bushland, and we compared LIPA, which are these drag socks that you drag across the top of the ground on a long polyethylene tube coming off of the pivot. LISA, which is very much like that, it's got a very long drop, and then a spray head or a sprinkler head that's very close to the surface, maybe 6 or 12 inches off that surface. MESA, which is a mid-elevation spray that's about 5 feet off the surface, which is the most common application method you see in this region. And then SDI, subsurface drip irrigation, that's buried about 12 inches below the soil surface. And what you see in these results is that the LIPA and the SDI really outperformed the spray application methods if we didn't have full capacity. If we had 50% well capacity or even 25, very low well capacities, we could still get some yields with those 2 methods, whereas the spray methods, our yields were really nosediving even more. But at the higher application rates, when we were up near full irrigation, then we were getting less yield with those more efficient methods. And we wondered, well, what the heck is going on here? Well, when we did these experiments, we were using crop coefficients that were developed using sprinkler application. And those crop coefficients were high because the sprinkler application was losing a lot of water to evaporation. We didn't realize that at the time. Everybody in the region was using those crop coefficients, and everybody in the region was using mid-elevation sprays. So it was working out for them. But what we were doing is we were over-applying water. You can see that in the water use efficiency. SDI and LIPA had higher water use efficiencies, particularly for SDI. That's the amount of crop you get per acre inch of water you put on. And tellingly, at the end of the season, what we saw when we looked at the deep soil water, and this is the soil water down to in excess of 2 meters or 8 feet deep, is that with our spray irrigation and our LIPA irrigation, we were using up soil water during the season. And with the SDI irrigation, we were actually increasing soil water, and particularly we were increasing deep soil water. And the reason for that is we had so much less evaporative loss from the SDI that we were pushing water down through the profile. And that's why we were losing yield, because we were pushing fertilizer down with that water that was going down deep in the profile. So we're losing our nitrogen to deep percolation. Well, there's an easy fix to this. Don't irrigate using crop coefficients developed for sprinkler irrigation when you're using SDI. Well, we wanted to, I'll show you these results first. SDI and LIPA really excelled at low well capacities. So if you didn't have sufficient water, they were definitely the systems to go with. But don't schedule those irrigations using the wrong crop coefficients. An ongoing issue for us to study. Well, recently, about 3 years ago, we decided we'd better study this and understand really what was going on in the overall water balance and try to quantify the amount of water that was being lost to evaporation from spray irrigation versus subsurface drip irrigation. You know, we need those hard numbers to justify the extra expense that we have with installing subsurface drip irrigation. So we put in this study, and we looked for water use. Importantly, we looked for the evaporative loss, we looked for the yield, and then the yield per unit of ET, or water use. We used large weighing lysimeters. At Bushland, we have 4 of these. Each is in the center of about a 5-acre field. These measure water use to 0.002 inch of water. They're very accurate measures of water use. They're about 10 feet on the side and 8 feet deep, and the soil in there has not been disturbed. It's the original intact monolith. And this is what it looks like when you've got a crop on it. This is our corn in 2013. It came back after nearly being hailed out. And you can see we have a whole suite of weather instruments above one of these weighing lysimeters, the same sorts of measurements that the previous speaker talked about. So we installed subsurface drip irrigation. This tape was on 60-inch centers. It was 12 to 14 inches deep. We had an emitter every 12 inches along this tape, so that we'd have pretty much a line source of water under the ground. The mid-elevation sprays were on the same spacing, but they were 5 feet above the ground. And this is what our short season sorghum looked like last year in a very rainy year. Or not last year, the year before last. Still fairly rainy. Now here's what the water use looked like for MESA, and in the MESA side of this, we had 2 fields that were MESA irrigated, mid-elevation spray irrigated. On that side, we irrigated one of those at 100% replenishment, and the other side at 75% of that, so we could see what a mild deficit irrigation would do. And you can see that on that southwest lysimeter, the full irrigation, we used water up over a ½ inch a day in the middle of the season, and we used proportionately less water in that deficit irrigated side. But on the SDI, and notice that the scale, the y-axis scale is the same on these 2 graphs, the SDI used even less water than even the deficit irrigated spray irrigated. So it's using less water in terms of overall AT. So what we did in this graph is we subtracted the ET from the MESA irrigated from the ET from the SDI, sorry, it's the backwards. We subtracted the ET of the SDI fields from the ET of the fully irrigated, spray irrigated fields. And the blue lines are excess evaporation from spray irrigation. What we're doing with spray irrigation, especially early in the season, as you can see on the left-hand side of the graph, we're spraying that on bare soil, trying to get enough water in the soil so we can germinate a crop. We very often have to do that in the Panhandle. We often do not have enough moisture near the soil surface to germinate a crop, so we often have to pre-irrigate. We lost 2.5 inches up to planting of the water that we sprayed onto that soil surface. This is very common in our fine textured soils. In the sandier soils, we lose less water because it goes deeply, but in the more clay, fine textured soils, we tend to lose a lot of that spray application onto bare soil. Then after emergence, up until the point that the crop grew up tall enough to be even with the spray plates, we lost another 2.6 inches to evaporation on that MESA irrigation. And then after that, once we were spraying within the canopy, then the evaporative loss was about the same from the SDI and the spray irrigation. This tells us a couple of things. One, the evaporative losses really are very large. And number two, if we use LISA, or if we put our mid-elevation sprays down further down, and LISA would be about a foot off the ground, that canopy is going to grow up above those spray plates a lot faster, and we're going to reduce our evaporative losses a lot sooner. Now, one of the reasons people don't do that is that if you're going to do this with a center pivot, you have to plant on a circle, because those drops have got to move along those rows. And when we plant in a straight line, and then we try to run drops that are very low through that crop, we tend to tear things up. So we have to learn to plant on a circle. I'm happy to say I see more and more fields in the Panhandle and in western Kansas that are planted on a circle, and this is exactly why. People are putting those sprays down deeper. So this is the results in terms of yields and water use. And this is a little different from the story we heard from the last speaker, because what we measured directly with weighing lysimeters is that our fully irrigated, MESA irrigated, used about 32 inches of water. And the sprinkler, or the subsurface drip irrigated side, used only 26 or 27 inches of water. And the yields were much greater on the SDI side. Now that part of the story is the same as what we heard before. And this is fairly universal. When people go to SDI for cotton in this region, they tend to have higher yields, often a bale or a bale and a half higher. We've shown that we get higher yields with SDI, and we actually showed that in the 90s as well on some smaller plots. So this definitely can boost your yields. These are not very high yields. I will say that this is not what we aim for, but when your crop's nearly wiped out by hail and it comes back from below the ground, it's pretty remarkable that we got yields that were this high. Now this is sorghum water use. The next year we planted cotton because we thought we might make some money with cotton. We got to pay for this SDI system. Well, yeah, I saw a grin over there. Yeah, we thought we might make some money with cotton. We don't always plan for low cotton prices and hail. The cotton was hailed out. We planted short season sorghum and got a crop up about the 1st of July and did fairly well. This is the MESA side. That was a wetter year, so the deficit irrigated side used about the same amount of water as the fully irrigated side because we got enough rainfall that it never really suffered from any deficit at all. It was a very late crop. This is the SDI side. It did use less water, particularly early in the season because we didn't have that evaporative loss. And this is the difference. And you can see early in the season, we lost about 2.1 inches to evaporative loss from the sprinkler irrigated side compared to the SDI. And we lost another 2.1 inches later in the season But there's a reason for that. We actually irrigated the sprinkler irrigated side correctly, and we had a mistake in our soil water measurements that we were using to irrigate by, and inappropriately under irrigated the SDI side, which is an unfortunate mistake. And that mistake resulted in a loss of ovules during flowering. Ovule formation was compromised on the SDI side, and we had low yields as a result of that. So the SDI in this case yielded less than the MESA irrigated, and that was entirely my fault due to a soil water measurement error that occurred mid-season. We looked at possible reasons for that. We had all sorts of things that we were wondering. Did we push our nitrogen too deeply with the SDI? Did we have deep percolation because we had so much rainfall early in the season? Along with that hail came some very big rains. What was going on? Well, we measure everything in these fields. We measure the plant height every couple of weeks. We measure the leaf area, the row width. We measure the number of heads. We measure the number of seeds per head. And what came out of this is that at harvest, the seed number was significantly greater in the MESA fields. We lost those ovules right at flowering because we under-irrigated the SDI side. The head weight, therefore, was significantly greater in the MESA fields, and we had larger yields, even though the head number was the same. And there you can see that error in soil water sensing. This is just a cautionary tale. The best irrigation system in the world is no good if you don't manage it well. And you need accurate soil water sensing if you're going to irrigate by soil water sensing, which is what we were doing. We're using the neutron probe. You also need to pay attention to mistakes in the data. So it was really water deficit, not unavailability, that was the primary cause of that reduced yield. It happened during differentiation. Conclusions, regardless, SDI reduced evaporative losses by 4 to 5.5 inches per season. All of you who are farmers know that an inch of water makes a big difference in yield for all the crops that we grow here on the high plains. If it's 4 or 5 inches, that's a lot of yield loss if we're not using the right irrigation application method. Those evaporative losses occurred both early and in mid-season. The evaporative loss was less when the crop was taller than the spray heads. So that says use LIPA, use LISA if you're not going to use SDI. Get your water application down low on the crop. And SDI did reduce overall maize yield by 5.75 inches while increasing yield by 20% and water use efficiency by 61%. And here I want to make an aside I hadn't planned on, but the earlier talk brought this out. If you're estimating ET using thermal data, you're looking at the crop canopy temperature, and that leaf is cooled by the transpiration that's going through the plant. Well, in this SDI irrigated field, all of the water was going through the plant. So the plant temperatures were lower. And the estimate of ET based on only canopy temperature would have been a larger number. But in fact, the total ET is the sum of transpiration and evaporation. So the canopy temperature is only part of that equation. The evaporative loss was so great on the sprinkler irrigated side that the total ET was larger on the sprinkler irrigated side. More water was used, even though the canopy temperature was probably higher. So the thermal data do not show us the evaporative loss. They only show us what's transpiring through the crop. Now I want to finish up with a preliminary report on another drip irrigation method called precision mobile drip irrigation. This is fairly new. That orange tube you see there is attached to a drop where a spray head would have been, and it is basically got drip emitters in it. This is manufactured by Netafim, and it's drug across the soil surface, And if you look closely, you can see 3 of these lines, one in every other inter-row. And these fall along the sprinkler lateral as it moves, and as you go farther from the center point of the pivot, you just make these tubes longer and longer so you have more emitters and therefore a higher flow rate as you go out towards the end of the lateral. That works quite well in regulating irrigation application. This isn't foolproof by any means, and we probably didn't have this installed last year as well as it might have been. One evidence of that is sometimes these lines switched rows. Here you can see 2 of the PDMI lines in adjacent inner rows. So they've switched, and on the left you see one that's hung up in the corn crop. Despite these sorts of things happening, we didn't see a lot of corn torn down by this. The effect on yield was insignificant, if there was an effect. And these are the yield results in the irrigation applications. There's no significant differences in yield between LISA, PMDI, and LIPA application. All 3 of these put water on the soil near the surface and spray very little water on the crop itself. So they're all putting water down very close. No significant differences actually gives the PMDI a little bit of a boost, because with LIPA and LISA in this soil, in our heavier soils, we get tremendous runoff if we don't furrow dike. And if we furrow dike, we get tremendous complaints from our tractor and combine operators because they don't like being bounced all over as they're going through the field. And in fact, we tear up a lot of equipment if we have furrow dikes. So furrow dikes, although, you know, they really do work, they hold the water on the land, they have their disadvantages as well. And with PMDI, we don't need furrow dikes, because that water is being distributed along a long length of that tubing, and it goes into the soil without wetting the soil significantly from side to side, and without ponding and without runoff. So it does have some legs. We'll see in the future whether it pans out as being something that really is a practical application, but I have some high hopes for it. I think it may well be something we see a lot of in the future. With that, I'll stop and entertain any questions. I do want to recognize my co-authors. I didn't do that at the beginning. Susan O'Shaughnessy did a lot of this work. Paul Calese, Dave Brower, and others have joined me in this effort. None of the stuff we do at Bushland is individual at all. It's a big team effort. And I want to recognize Ogallala Aquifer Program also for the funding that went into this program. So with that.
Any questions?
Confuse them, see. There's one. He knows what I'm talking about. And I know what he's talking about, yeah. But we probably ought to get together and speak, yeah. But no, we've used those techniques at Bushland, metric, CBAL, and a host of others for modeling our crops. Yeah, yeah. Any remote type of measurement has got some inaccuracy built into it, and that was acknowledged in the previous talk. You know, when you're looking at individual fields, you want to be very, very careful, because the pixel sizes are large enough that you can have influences from outside the field. It is very well adapted to regional analysis and is an excellent tool for regional analysis, and no one would dispute that. I certainly don't dispute it. It's being used a lot in the West. California is using it big time to look at their water problems, but Idaho, Washington State, Oregon, you know, the larger irrigated states in the West are using it a lot. Rick's making a fair amount of change, I think, as well. No, that's okay. Any others?
I applaud your research. Has the research that you've done, has that been converted into economic terms as to how it'll save the amount of water that has to be pumped or applied to a crop for irrigation?
in the Panhandle, if we save an inch of water, and we did these calculations back in the 90s, but if we save an inch of water in the Panhandle, it's about $12 million in pumping costs in about 1994 costs. What it would be today, I don't know, but there is, 4 inches of water saved would be 4 times that. You're getting up in the tens of millions of dollars of pumping cost alone savings. If you add on the improved yields, it's maybe double that. So, yeah, it can have a big economic impact.
Join me in thanking Steve for his presentation.